The airport was busy, full of people rushing to catch their flights. But Mrs. Jordan walked calmly. She was a black woman in her late 40s, wearing a clean white suit and gold earrings. Her face was peaceful, but her eyes were sharp. She moved with quiet confidence. When she reached the gate, the flight attendant smiled and said, "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to Flight 829. First class is this way." Mrs. Jordan nodded politely and walked toward the plane. She held a small black purse in one hand and her phone in the other. She didn't look rich, but there was something about her, something powerful and calm. As she stepped into the first-class cabin, two white businessmen were already seated near her assigned seat. One of them, a tall man with slick hair and a loud voice, looked up and frowned. "Hey, looks like someone took a wrong turn," he said to his friend, chuckling. His friend, shorter and rounder, leaned in and whispered, "Yeah, maybe she's cleaning up or something." They both laughed. Mrs. Jordan didn't react. She simply found her seat, seat 2A, placed her purse in the overhead bin, and sat down. But the tall man didn't stop. He raised his hand and called the flight attendant over. "Excuse me," he said loudly, pointing at Mrs. Jordan. "Are you sure she belongs in this section? I mean, first class." The flight attendant, a young woman in her 20s, looked nervous. She checked Mrs. Jordan's ticket, then nodded. "Yes, sir. Her seat is correct. Seat 2A is hers." The tall man scoffed. "Well, that's a surprise," he said, shaking his head. "Didn't know charity was part of the airline business now." The short man laughed again, louder this time. "Maybe someone gifted her the seat, you know, for good behavior or something." Other passengers nearby heard the comments. Some looked down. Others turned their faces away. No one said anything. Mrs. Jordan still didn't say a word. She calmly opened her purse and pulled out her phone. The flight attendant, clearly embarrassed, leaned down and whispered, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry about that. Would you like me to move you to a different seat? Maybe the back row is quieter." Mrs. Jordan looked at her with a soft smile. "No, thank you," she said gently. "This seat is just fine." Then she unlocked her phone and slowly scrolled through her contacts. The two men smirked. "She's probably texting her cousin," the tall one joked, "or calling customer service to complain." But Mrs. Jordan wasn't laughing. Her face stayed calm, but her fingers moved quickly on the phone. She pressed a number and raised the phone to her ear. "Hello," she said quietly. "Yes, it's me. Activate protocol. I won't be quiet anymore." She ended the call and gently placed the phone on the armrest. Now the men looked at each other, confused. "What protocol?" The short one whispered. "She's bluffing." Mrs. Jordan turned her head slightly and looked at both men. Her voice was calm but firm. "I didn't want to do this," she said, "but you forced my hand." Her words were clear. Her tone was strong. For a moment, there was silence in the cabin. The tall man shifted in his seat. Who did you just call?" Mrs. Jordan didn't answer. Now the other passengers started to notice. Phones were being pulled out. Some passengers began recording. The flight attendant stepped back, unsure what to say or do. The engines of the plane started humming, and the captain's voice came on the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 829. We'll be taking off shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts." But no one was focused on the safety instructions. All eyes were on the quiet woman in seat 2A, the woman who had made a single call. The men, once laughing, now sat uncomfortably. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know who she was. But suddenly, it felt like they had made a big mistake. And the audience watching this story, they were left with one big question. The airplane slowly began to move toward the runway, but inside the first-class cabin, all the attention stayed on one woman, Mrs. Jordan. She sat calmly in seat 2A, hands folded in her lap, her face peaceful. But everyone around her could feel something had changed. It was like the air had become heavier, quiet, tense. The two white businessmen who mocked her earlier weren't laughing anymore. The tall one kept glancing at her, then at his phone, then back at her. The shorter one leaned in and whispered, "What do you think she meant by activate protocol? She's probably bluffing, right?" The tall man didn't answer. He just shrugged and looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Jordan didn't look at them. She stared out the window, her phone resting on the armrest. Her calmness was starting to make people nervous. Usually, someone insulted like that would yell, cry, or complain. But she didn't. She just made one phone call and waited. A few passengers in economy class peeked through the curtain that separated them from first class. Some had already heard about what happened. A woman from row 10 whispered to her seatmate, "I heard they tried to kick her out of first class, but she made a call and everything changed." A young man from business class scrolled through his phone. A short video had already been uploaded. Someone from first class had recorded the moment when Mrs. Jordan calmly said, "Activate protocol." The video was spreading fast. Comments were flooding in. "Who is this woman? This feels like a movie." She didn't even raise her voice. Lee jeaned. Meanwhile, the flight attendant stood near the curtain, holding the service tray tightly. She kept glancing at Mrs. Jordan, then at the businessman. Her hands were shaking slightly. She whispered to the senior attendant, "I think we made a mistake." The senior attendant, an older man with a tired face, asked, "Did you offend her?" "She was treated badly by those two men," she replied. "I offered her a different seat. She refused. Then she made a call, and now everyone's acting weird." He sighed and said, "Let's keep it professional. Don't make things worse." Back in seat 2A, Mrs. Jordan finally reached for her glass of water and took a sip. She turned her head slightly and looked at the tall businessman. Her voice was soft but clear. "You know," she said, "some people speak loudly to feel powerful. Others don't need to raise their voice at all." The man swallowed hard. "Listen, lady," he began, trying to sound tough. "We didn't mean anything by it. It was just a joke." Mrs. Jordan nodded slowly. "Ah," she said, "you call it a joke. I call it a habit." He had no reply. The short man tried to laugh it off. "Look, we were just surprised. No offense. You don't see people like you here often." Mrs. Jordan looked directly at him. Her eyes were calm but piercing. "You mean people with my skin color?" she asked. Silence. "People like me own companies you've never heard of," she added. "People like me sign checks that pay the salaries of people like you." The man went quiet. Passengers were now openly watching. Some pretended to read magazines, but their eyes stayed on Mrs. Jordan. One young black woman seated a few rows back had tears in her eyes. She whispered, "She's doing what we all wish we could do." Suddenly, there was a soft sound. Ding. A message arrived on Mrs. Jordan's phone. She picked it up, read it, then smiled. The tall businessman leaned forward. "Who was that? Who messaged you?" She looked at him for a moment, then spoke with quiet confidence. "My office. They're watching the video already. So is the press. So is the aviation board. You'll be hearing from them very soon." Now the man looked scared. I don't understand. Who are you?" he asked. Mrs. Jordan didn't answer. The flight continued quietly for a few minutes. Drinks were served, but no one could focus. The silence in first class was thick with tension. Finally, just before landing, Mrs. Jordan stood up to stretch her legs. As she walked to the restroom, passengers moved aside. Some nodded at her, some just watched in silence. The tall businessman whispered to his friend, "She has power. Real power. And we just messed with the wrong person." The short man buried his face in his hands. Mrs. Jordan returned to her seat and sat down with grace. She looked out the window again. The plane began to descend. As the city lights came into view, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a regular passenger. This was a woman with silent power. And her call was just the beginning. The plane landed smoothly on the runway. As the tires touched the ground, passengers gave a small clap, but it wasn't the usual cheerful landing. The mood was different, heavy, silent. Everyone was still thinking about what happened in first class. Mrs. Jordan remained calm. As always, she took her time gathering her purse and phone. Around her, people watched carefully, not with judgment now, but with quiet respect and curiosity. Something about her presence had changed the atmosphere. The two businessmen who insulted her sat stiffly in their seats, avoiding eye contact. It looked like they were sweating, even though the cabin was cool. The tall one pulled out his phone again and checked his emails. His face went pale. "What is it?" whispered the short one. "We've got a message from corporate," he replied, voice shaking. They saw the video. It's everywhere. The short man leaned in and grabbed his phone too. His eyes widened. It was true. The video had gone viral. Uploaded just an hour ago by a random passenger. Now it had over 2 million views. The title read, "Black woman in first class silently destroys two racists with one phone call." Comments were pouring in. "She's a boss. I want to be heard when I grow up." That calm power. That's years of experience. Who are those guys? Fire them. The video showed the moment Mrs. Jordan said, "I didn't want to do this, but you forced my hand." People couldn't stop talking about it. When the plane doors opened, passengers began exiting row by row. The businessman tried to get out fast, but the flight attendant stopped them. "Excuse me, sirs," she said. "Please remain seated. There's someone waiting to speak with you." Their eyes widened. "Who?" they both asked. But she didn't answer. Mrs. Jordan walked past them without a word, but right behind her, at the gate, a tall woman in a dark suit stood waiting. She had a badge around her neck and a tablet in her hand. When she saw Mrs. Jordan, she smiled. "Ma'am, we've already started the process," she said. "The airline's board will meet within the hour, and their company's public image team is in panic mode." Mrs. Jordan nodded. "Good. Let's make sure they understand this is bigger than just two men." The woman walked beside her as they moved through the terminal. Behind them, the businessmen were now being escorted off the plane by security officers. One of the guards handed them papers, official complaints from the airline, and possible legal action from the aviation board. I don't get it," the short man whispered. "Why is this happening so fast? Who is she?" The answer came from one of the younger security guards who had recognized her from the video. He whispered, "That woman, that's Jordan Enterprises. She owns half the tech your company depends on." "What?" they both said at once. "She's one of the biggest private investors in this airline. She doesn't fly first class because she's rich. She flies first class because she owns the plane." Now they looked at each other in shock. Outside the airport, the world had already changed. News reporters were waiting. Microphones, cameras, and flashes filled the arrival hall. People were chanting her name, holding signs like, "Justice for Mrs. Jordan. Dignity has no color. One voice can start a storm." But Mrs. Jordan didn't speak to the cameras. She simply gave a quiet nod and stepped into a black SUV waiting for her. As the car drove off, her assistant turned to her. "Ma'am, do you want us to respond to the media?" She shook her head. "No, let them talk. Let the truth move on its own." Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Another company apologizing. Another meeting being canceled. Another CEO requesting a private call. She ignored them all. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about showing power. This was about respect. And the storm had just begun. Meanwhile, at the office of the two businessmen's company, chaos had broken out. The CEO was shouting. Phones were ringing nonstop. Reporters wanted answers. Clients were threatening to pull out. "Who insulted her?" the CEO demanded. Someone showed him the flight log and pointed to the names. "Fire them," he said. "Fire them right now." "But sir," They've been with the company for 15 years. I don't care if they built the company. They just broke it in one flight. Back in her home, Mrs. Jordan sat by her window with a cup of tea. The city lights flickered outside. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from a young woman. It read, "Thank you for standing up so calmly. I watched what happened. You gave me courage I never had. I won't be silent anymore either." Mrs. Jordan smiled softly. One moment, one phone call, one voice, and the world was starting to listen. The sun had barely risen the next day when the backlash began. All over social media, news channels, and business networks, the video of Mrs. Jordan on the plane was still trending. It was everywhere. People were sharing it, reacting to it, talking about it in schools, offices, cafes, and even on the streets. But not everyone was cheering. Some people were angry, some were defensive, and others were afraid. At the company where the two businessmen worked, a large financial firm called Larch and Stone, the walls were shaking, not physically, but from inside. Fear and confusion had spread like wildfire. Staff whispered in corners. Executives locked their doors. The CEO had already fired both men. But that wasn't enough for the public. People were demanding answers. How did two top executives think that behavior was okay? What kind of training do they have over there? Who let them act this way for years? Even the company's biggest client, a major tech group, issued a statement saying, "We are reviewing our partnership with Larch and Stone." Mrs. Jordan hadn't even spoken publicly yet, but her silence made the pressure stronger. Everyone wanted to know what she would say next. Inside Mrs. Jordan's home, her assistant walked in, holding a tablet. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "the backlash is growing. Not just against those two men, but their whole company. Their stock dropped 12% in one day." Mrs. Jordan looked up from her cup of tea. She was dressed simply, sitting on her couch, relaxed. "I didn't ask for that," she said. "I know," the assistant replied, "but people are listening now. And they're angry, not just at what happened on that flight, but at what happens every day to women like you, to people like us." Mrs. Jordan nodded. She knew the truth. This wasn't just about her anymore. The world had made it bigger. At the same time, the media began to dig into the pasts of the two fired men. It didn't take long to find more troubling stories. A former intern said one of the men mocked her accent and told her she wasn't first-class material. Another employee claimed she was denied a promotion because she didn't fit the image of the company. Emails leaked where the men used insulting nicknames for their coworkers. Now the world saw a pattern. This wasn't a one-time incident. This was a system. The backlash spread further. Protesters stood outside the Larch and Stone office holding signs. People posted videos refusing to work with the company. Former clients shared stories they were once too afraid to tell. At a live press conference, the company's new spokesperson tried to calm the public. "We deeply regret what happened," she said. "Mrs. Jordan is a respected businesswoman and investor. We are reviewing our internal policies and we apologize." But it was too late. The damage was already done. Meanwhile, a famous talk show host called Mrs. Jordan's team, asking if she'd like to come on air. So did 3 major news channels. And a senator's office called, asking if she would consider speaking at a human rights event. Her assistant read all the invitations out loud. "What do you want to do, ma'am?" she asked gently. Mrs. Jordan looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "I never wanted the spotlight," she said. "I just wanted peace. Respect." The assistant nodded. "But now the world is listening to you." Mrs. Jordan closed her eyes. "Then I'll speak," she whispered. "Not for me. For the people who never got the chance." Later that night, a new video went live. Mrs. Jordan sat in a chair with a soft light behind her. Her voice was calm. Her words were simple. "This isn't about 2 men who laughed at me. This is about a world that keeps laughing at people who look like me." But we're not invisible. We're not silent. And we will not be ignored. Within an hour, the video hit 10 million views. People began using a new hashtag, #WeareNoteInvisible. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It had become a movement. At the same time, the two businessmen sat in silence inside a private room at their lawyer's office. Their careers were gone. Their names were all over the news. No one would return their calls. "We just asked a question," one of them said quietly. "We didn't even touch her." The lawyer shook his head. "It's not about what you did. It's about what it meant, and who she is." Outside, the world kept moving. But now, something had changed. A voice that once stayed silent had broken through the noise. A woman who only wanted peace had started a storm. And the backlash. It was only the beginning. The world couldn't stop talking about Mrs. Jordan. News anchors spoke about her with awe. Young women called her a role model. Older voices called her a quiet storm. But one question remained in everyone's mind. Who is Mrs. Jordan? Really? People had seen the video. They had felt her strength, but they didn't know her story. Not yet. That changed when a well-known journalist released a full interview titled, "Behind the Calm Power: The Untold Story of Mrs. Jordan." The interview began with a quiet setting. A calm room. Soft lights. Just two women sitting across from each other. The journalist looked at Mrs. Jordan and smiled gently. "People are calling you fearless," she said, "but where does that strength come from?" Mrs. Jordan smiled, but it wasn't a proud smile. It was soft, almost sad. "It comes from pain," she said, "and from years of being told I wasn't enough." She looked straight into the camera. "I've been treated as less than since I was a child. At school, at work, even when I built my own company." The camera cut to old photos. A young girl in a simple dress, standing in front of a broken school. A teenage Mrs. Jordan holding books taller than her. A woman smiling next to a building with a small sign, "Jordan Technologies." The journalist asked, "You own one of the most powerful tech companies in the country, but you rarely appear in public. Why?" Mrs. Jordan looked down for a moment. "Because I didn't want people to see me first as a black woman. I wanted them to see my work, my ideas, my value." She paused. But even in silence, people still judged me. The interview revealed shocking facts. Mrs. Jordan started her company with just $5,000 and an old laptop. Her software now runs on half the planes owned by the same airline where the incident happened. She's been funding scholarships for girls of color for 15 years, quietly, without attention. She secretly owned shares in companies that fired the two men who insulted her. "Yes," she said calmly, "I made the call, but I didn't ruin their lives. Their actions did." The world reacted fast. The interviews spread like fire. People cried. People cheered. And people asked, how many more stories like hers are hidden? The hashtag #WeareNoteInvisible grew stronger. New stories came out. People shared their own moments of disrespect, silence, and survival. At the same time, the two fired businessmen tried to hide. One of them gave a short interview to defend himself. "She overreacted. I didn't mean it like that," he said. But the public wasn't buying it. A woman online replied, "You didn't just question her seat. You questioned her worth." Meanwhile, Mrs. Jordan's calm voice reached new ears. A top university offered her an honorary doctorate. The president's team requested her for a speech on national television. 3 major companies asked her to help design new training on respect and inclusion. But Mrs. Jordan didn't want fame. She wanted change. That night, she sat with her assistant on the balcony. The city lights sparkled below. The assistant turned to her. "You've changed everything, ma'am. Do you realize that?" Mrs. Jordan took a deep breath. "I didn't want to change the world," she said. "I just wanted the world to stop changing me." Her voice was steady, but her eyes held years of hurt, power, and peace. I stayed quiet too long, she added. Now, I speak, and I won't stop. The next morning, the airline officially renamed their leadership training program the Jordan Standard, a training in respect, power, and presence. They didn't do it for publicity. They did it because they knew she wasn't just a passenger. She was a turning point. The truth was out. Not just the truth about two men on a plane, but the truth about power, the truth about prejudice, the truth about what quiet strength can do. Mrs. Jordan never shouted. She never fought. She never begged. She simply made a call. And now, the world would never be the same. The video of Mrs. Jordan's story had now reached over 50 million views. Her name was everywhere. But what happened next surprised even her. The same people who once ignored her, the same companies that stayed silent. Now, they were reaching out, desperate, apologizing, and begging for help. The CEO of the airline personally sent a message to her office. We deeply regret what happened. We want to invite you to join our board of directors. Your voice matters. Mrs. Jordan stared at the message without blinking. She turned to her assistant. They didn't think my voice mattered when I was just a woman sitting in first class, she said softly. That wasn't all. The head of Larch and Stone, the company where the two men worked, called and offered her a public partnership. We want to fund diversity programs with your name, he said nervously over video call. We want to fix this. Mrs. Jordan's face was calm. You want to use my name, she replied, to clean your image. But I'm not a broom. The man sat speechless. I don't work with people who see me as a problem only when others are watching, she continued. I work with people who see my worth when no one is looking. She ended the call without another word. Soon, more calls came in. Luxury brands, TV shows, magazines, banks, even international airlines. Everyone wanted Mrs. Jordan's approval. But Mrs. Jordan didn't chase fame. She wasn't here to be used. She wanted real change. At a private event, a powerful businessman, once known for ignoring diversity, walked up to her. He extended his hand and said with a forced smile, Mrs. Jordan, I've always admired your work. She shook his hand politely but didn't smile back. You never even knew my name until last week, she replied. The room fell quiet. The man laughed awkwardly, trying to save face. But Mrs. Jordan didn't laugh. She didn't have to. She had the power now, and they all knew it. Behind the scenes, things were changing. Her company, Jordan Technologies, received over 100,000 job applications in 1 week. Young black women across the world wrote letters to her. Some said, because of you, I won't let anyone tell me I don't belong. You sat quietly and changed everything. Thank you. You gave me a voice I didn't know I had. Mrs. Jordan read each one with tears in her eyes. She turned to her assistant and said, This is what matters. Not headlines, not business, but this feeling that I helped someone feel seen. Meanwhile, the two businessmen who started it all had vanished from the public eye. One had moved to another state. The other tried to start his own small firm, but nobody wanted to be connected with him. The reputation they built in 20 years had been destroyed in 20 seconds of cruelty. Back at Mrs. Jordan's office, her assistant walked in with a surprised look. There's a letter, she said, from one of the men, handwritten. Mrs. Jordan raised her eyebrows but opened the envelope slowly. The letter read, I lost everything, and I know I deserve it, but I need you to know, I didn't hate you. I just didn't know how to respect you. I was never taught. And now I live with shame I can't undo. Mrs. Jordan folded the letter gently and said nothing. Her assistant asked, Do you want to reply? She shook her head. No, he already got his answer when the world stood up and I didn't have to say a word. That evening, she appeared at a live forum for young leaders. She stood at the podium, looked out at the crowd, and said, Some people only respect power. That's why they never respected us. But what they don't understand is, our silence was never weakness. It was grace. And when grace speaks, the powerful beg. The audience stood. They clapped, cried, and cheered. Mrs. Jordan walked off stage quietly. No crown, no spotlight, just peace. And in that peace was power. Years passed. The story of Mrs. Jordan was no longer just a news headline. It had become a symbol, a lesson, a quiet revolution that changed the world without a single shout. People no longer asked, "What happened on that plane?" Now they asked, "Where were you when Mrs. Jordan made that call?" A new generation grew up hearing her name in classrooms. In a school in Atlanta, a little black girl raised her hand during history class and asked, "Was Mrs. Jordan a president?" The teacher smiled. "No, sweetheart. She was something more. She showed the world what real power looks like." At airports, things were different now. Airline staff were trained not just in customer service, but in dignity training, named after her. Signs at boarding gates read, "Every seat deserves respect. The Jordan way." Passengers noticed the change, and it wasn't just policy. It was culture. Her company, Jordan Technologies, had grown. But Mrs. Jordan never made it about profits. She created tech schools for underprivileged youth. She opened training centers in small towns. She funded programs that taught confidence, communication, and courage, especially for girls of color. People asked her why she invested in those who had nothing. Her answer was always simple. Because once, that was me. Mrs. Jordan herself became more private with time. No interviews, no cameras, no stage lights. She went back to her garden, her books, and her long walks at sunset. But her absence only made her presence stronger. Because everywhere she once stood, people stood taller. Every room she entered, even in silence, became louder with truth. Years later, a statue was placed at the very airport where it all began. It showed Mrs. Jordan not standing tall and proud, but seated, just like she was that day on the plane. Her legs crossed, her phone in her hand, her eyes forward. The plaque beneath it read, "She sat in her seat." The world stood up. People from around the globe came to see it. They took pictures. They told their children. One day, a young woman walked up to the statue. She looked just like Mrs. Jordan, strong, elegant, and calm. She placed a single white rose at the base and whispered, "Because of you, they'll never doubt me again." Then she walked away, head high. That night, in her quiet home surrounded by books and flowers, an older Mrs. Jordan sat in her chair. She looked out the window. Her assistant, now much older too, handed her a letter. "It's from a young girl in Nigeria," she said. "She says you're the reason she wants to become a lawyer." Mrs. Jordan smiled softly. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. The world already knew. Her voice had gone beyond sound. Her name had become a legacy. The final message of her story echoed everywhere. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to fight to win. You don't need to prove yourself to people who refuse to see you. Just sit in your seat, stay in your truth, and let the world rise to meet your power. Because that's exactly what she did. And in doing so, she changed everything.